2022 and a live recording of the World Staffing Podcast, where I meet with the greatest minds of the staffing industry. I'm interested in what drives them, what inspires them, and what keeps them up at night. I'm very excited to be joined by a special guest today, who is an industry expert. For the last 17 years, he was traveling the world in various roles as an executive at Randstad and is currently the CEO of Randstad Sourceright, Mike Smith. Welcome to the World Staffing Summit, Mike.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome, Mike. Before we dive in, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey in the staffing industry.
Sure. I've been lucky enough, as you said, to be in the staffing industry for 17 years, all of those with Randstad. Began my career as a graduate recruiter in Australia and then had the pleasure of working up the ranks within the Australian market to then look after our Singapore business. I then ran our Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia and other Southeast Asian entities before transitioning to Europe to take over our outsourcing business for Europe, Middle East and Africa. I then had a very nice stint in addition to doing that role running our UK operating entity. And in December of 2020, I relocated to the US and I'm here in Houston, Texas. And I have the pleasure of running our multi-billion-dollar outsourcing business known as Randstad Sourceright.
Mike, let's speak about why HR will continue to be an organization's North Star in 2022. So, 2021 was another year of challenges no one could have anticipated, obviously with the great resignation and the new virus strain. But in a recent article looking into 2022, you argued that HR will continue to be an organization's North Star. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I think certainly, as you mentioned, Jan, these are extraordinary times for the staffing industry. And the Staffing Summit, I think, is a great way for peers and colleagues to get together and share those war stories on how we can continue to add value to organizations, help beat these record levels of talent scarcity that we're seeing, as well as leverage technology advancements, but still keep people at the center of growing business and creating an impact for our societies. In relation to HR being the North Star, I think firstly you see over the last 2 years a drastic decline in employment followed by an explosion of employment. We see that's also coupled with record resignations in places like the US. Then at the same time, that talent scarcity is really dragging on countries' capabilities to achieve the economic growth that they'd really like. We see that particularly in Germany and the UK. Mm-hmm. And then you've also got these manufacturing and supply chain difficulties that are creating bottlenecks and constrained capabilities that are effectively creating this perfect storm for HR. And we saw HR being leaned on dramatically over the last 2 years. We still think that HR has a really dominant role to play, particularly the talent acquisition substream of HR, in helping their organization's most important asset, its people, continue to come to life. And there's 3 areas that we're advocating or imploring HR to play a more dominant role within their organizations. The first is dealing with the uncertainty of workforce planning. Historically, organizations have had a lot of room for improvement in workforce planning. Mm-hmm. And I think it's HR's role to continue to become more pragmatic and real about the change they can make there. The second is skilling as a key enabler, particularly for future-proofing organizations' capability to grow. We see just in a small case of organizations when they can be in a situation where they can unlock the skills of their internal employees better, then you get much more free-flowing internal mobility within organizations. Mm-hmm. And then the last place where we're talking a little bit about HR playing a more dominant role in being the North Star is really about introducing more flexibility. And that's flexibility in terms of mobilizing workforces, policies, talent, resourcing, tech adoption, that idea of becoming a more flexible and agile organization, serving as the bedrock for future competitive advantage of organizations.
Those are actually really good points. And I would actually love to dive deeper into all 3 of them, but maybe we can start with number one, how organizations can optimize workforce strategies and planning while dealing with uncertainty. What do you think are the areas that other executives can still lead and drive when applying agility and foresight?
Sure. I mean, if you just look into some research that we did more recently, every year we do a talent trend survey. That talent trend survey is a report effectively of 850 human capital leaders globally. And it was interesting to see this year that many of those HR and talent acquisition leaders cited that in the last 24 months, they've had an inability to kind of break away from the tactical day-to-day requirements that the business is asking from. They said, we've had less time to focus on the long-term value creation activities that really are now allow their organization to get ahead of competition. Mm-hmm. And we do expect some of those issues to remain throughout 2022. However, we do see HR and talent acquisition already pragmatically trying to balance a little bit more that tactical with the strategic elements of their role. Mm-hmm. And particularly in the strategic elements, they're saying, I want to really double down on my ability to bring more agility and foresight to the workforce. Mm-hmm. And there's two main areas we see HR doing that well within organizations that we have the pleasure of working with at the moment. Firstly, you see them making large investments in talent intelligence capabilities. So that idea of understanding in more detail, in granular concrete detail, supply and demand constraints, compensation issues, identifying hidden pockets of talent globally, as well as better understanding the skills of their own workforce in order to generate business cases for change, to go to their internal senior executives and say, here's why we need to think about a different location of hiring these workers. Mm-hmm. Here's why we need to review our remuneration and compensation policy. Here's why we need to invest in HR and technology. So bringing to life some of that talent intelligence data to drive changes in how things were done previously. Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, we see organizations, to my point earlier, traditionally having room for improvement in workforce planning. And as a result of that, becoming much more intentional about where they focus their workforce planning efforts. So they're saying, for example, we understand that these skill sets or roles within a company drive a disproportionate amount of value creation. Mm-hmm. Let's say, for example, they're software developers, and they might have 1,000 software developers, and their turnover might be 20%, and they need to grow their software developer base by 300. So they say, we need a foolproof future plan around how we are going to get 500 software developers into the company this year. And our efforts in doubling down that might be at the expense of some other less value creating roles that we consider to be enablers or supporters of the company's strategy, because our ability to grow truly relies on our ability to get these 500 software developers. So that pragmatic change on those two areas we see playing a very dominant role.
Yeah. Very interesting. I think, I'm super excited actually about the upcoming report, and I know that you had more and more findings in that report. And one specific one was around technology. So maybe we shift gears a little bit and talk about technology. What are some of the latest technologies and digital enhancements and advancements that you can see play a vital role in bringing more efficiencies and effectiveness into our space?
Sure. So you're referring to our talent trends report, as I mentioned earlier, and that it already shows that just under half of the 850 people that we surveyed said mm-hmm. they're now in the practice of utilizing what they consider to be best-in-class HR technology to help facilitate work, simplify applying for a job, screen candidates, create content, and leverage connections within the company. In particular, we see AI supporting the screening matching process with our client base really being the predominant flavor at the moment. And that's obviously to do with the external dynamics that we see in the market around just very busily trying to fill jobs, replace turnover, et cetera, and mm-hmm. still get an increased level of productivity for what many organizations are seeing is a decreased internal talent acquisition or HR team. Mm-hmm. Concretely, we see two technologies predominantly having the greatest impact within the market at the moment. And those technologies always seem to get a better penetration rate within the organization when they have a 360-degree stakeholder impact. For example, so screening technologies that are offering candidates a realistic job preview. What is it like to actually do this job within the company? that also offer candidates great feedback on these are the areas that you scored well. These are the areas you need to think of scoring better on in the next part of the assessment, etc. Or if you're unsuccessful, these are the reasons why, as well as screening technology that offers the hiring manager feedback on these are the areas you should drill down further with this candidate as they go throughout the process. And that's all in the effort to ensure protecting the consumer or service product brand, employer brand of the company, as well as ensuring the fit between the hiring manager and the candidate is what you expect to minimize turnover, maximize engagement and productivity. And then the second area that we're seeing AI play a real dominant role is that search and match piece. And that's where search and match technologies can kind of absorb what we refer to as latent data sets. So organizations having a CRM or ATS where people have applied to work for the company, a VMS technology perhaps, or a talent pooling technology where they handle their contingent workers. And then they might have a separate database where they have all of their internal HCM or human capital management for all their internal employees at the moment. And what they're doing is a search and match AI is running across all of those latent data sets and suggesting to hiring managers, here's all the ways that you could get that work done in the future. You may not have considered a contingent candidate, but actually there's someone good who could do this for you. There's a remote gig worker on a freelance platform that you hadn't considered previously. And having one search that runs across all of that talent and presenting that way of work to get done to a hiring manager, we see having a really big impact on how companies are driving a total talent mindset and getting a competitive advantage versus other organizations they're competing with for that talent at the moment.
I totally agree. And, when speaking of market intelligence, that brings us to the point number 2 of the 3 points that you mentioned initially, which is skilling as a key enabler. So your organization, Randstad Sourceright, issued a global in-demand skills report in Q4 of last year, laying out why and where demand is far surpassing supply of talent. Can you tell us a little bit more about the research and the findings you guys had?
Sure. In summary, the study really analyzes and provides job and labor market data for what we consider to be 9 high demand skills across 26 markets globally. And what we really see there is the majority of the skills and competencies that organizations were looking for prior to the arrival of COVID, AI, AR, VR, machine learning, data science, cybersecurity, UI, UX, etc. It hasn't really changed. What's changed is there's been a drastic increase in the demand for those skills globally. And what we've seen is that having a one-dimensional view of talent intelligence doesn't actually make it any easier for your organization. So you might be able to pinpoint where there's a particular large supply of talent in a particular market, but unless you understand what's the competition like in that market, how will your brand resonate with that market, are your salary expectations on point, then it doesn't necessarily work for your organization. So what we've seen from our research is that today, both external and internal market intelligence is considered critical by HRTA leaders. Almost everyone in our survey come back and said, we will not be able to compete in the future unless we have more data to help us make better decisions on how that gets done. So we're really advocating that it's a major weapon in the war for talent that we see coming in the future. And next to that, we also see it's about trying to find a way to ensure that the data that you have on understanding the skills that exist within your internal workforce already is a great way, as I mentioned earlier, to unlock internal mobility. So we see organizations saying the ability to get all of my internal employees to keep their profiles up to date with all the skills that they have is really difficult. They have a greater propensity to keep LinkedIn up to date than they do their internal profiles within companies. And as a result of it not being updated, I miss out on the ability to consider them for jobs because I don't have a formal way of capturing those skills. So we see a huge amount of effort on trying to get internal employees to keep their profiles up to date, discussions around kind of scraping public profile information, etc. But getting that right, and we see correlates significantly with increases in employee retention, in engagement, and it's a really tough market out there, I think, for skilling at the moment. I mean, we saw in our research, 80% of workers acknowledge, hey, I need to keep learning. I need to develop my skills to maintain and increase my employability. Yet 58% of them said the pace of change is super fast. I don't understand what I should be focusing my time on and reskilling. And as a result of that, I need my employer and all governments to assess the gaps and give me more guidance so that I can keep myself at the forefront, keep myself employed. And probably my last point in relation to that is what we saw when organizations really did have a great and robust reskilling strategy and had a strong internal mobility offering, their ability to compete and attract the right talent was significantly above the benchmark for other organizations.
That's really great insight. I think the reskilling and skilling piece will be extremely interesting to watch over the next 5 to 10 years and what's going to happen in that market. I think there's exciting opportunities for companies to also innovate on that front. So I'm excited to see
absolutely.
the developments on that side. So, Mike, we discussed point number 1, point number 2, but what about point number 3, where you mentioned the area about flexibility? So I think it's easier said than done. But what do you think? How do HR leaders and organizations create flexibility while controlling their costs, but then again, putting their employees at number 1 priority, so to say?
Yeah, I think the overriding theme here needs to be that organizations need to be able to pivot from the plan that they have in place. You have to have a plan, but you need to be realistic and pragmatic about the fact that that plan might change, and your ability to be able to change quickly is going to be incredibly important. And whether that's embracing a flexible work from home policy, aiming to attract and retain different talent than you had previously, using more contingent, having more frequent scenario planning, irrespective of that, your ability to move on a dime is important. I think a good example of this is SAP. They went to 100% flexible and trust-based workplace. Employees can effectively decide on how often they work from where. We see that typically kind of correlates with most organizations to being 1 or 2 days a week based on most of the internal surveys that we've seen. And that really correlates with the market. We do an incredibly large research report every quarter called the Work Monitor. And out of that Work Monitor survey, we saw more recently that 40% said a key deciding factor in whether I work for a company or not is whether they have flexibility to allow me to work from home and work from other locations as and when I choose. So if you're not embracing that kind of hybrid schedule and empowering talent to make choices, it's going to be more difficult for you to kind of find talent. I think flexibility can mean a lot of different things to different people. And it also comes in the form of helping hiring managers think about how they can get work done. There's a responsibility for HR to be that North Star. I think too often organizations think in the traditional silos of we've always done that job permanently. It's always been on site and therefore that's the way it should be. The ability to advocate for individuals in other countries, in other markets with different skill sets, job sharing, etc., is a great role for HR to play. And in doing so, I think they're really able to kind of set themselves up for a more future-proofed organization, helping control costs, helping to leverage different productivity scenarios, and really putting them advantage versus other organizations.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much for those great insights. And for the audience, keep an eye out on the reports from Randstad Sourceright that are coming out. I think those are really great data points that you gather there. So I'm super excited to keep following them. And Mike, thank you so much, for being here today. But before we close out, and take it to the rest of the program of the World Staffing Summit, are you ready for a rapid fire question round?
Sure, let's do it.
Awesome. So Mike, coffee or tea?
Definitely coffee.
Coffee, good choice. Summer, winter?
Well, I live in Houston, Texas. So if anyone knows that area, it is hot here all the time. So definitely summer.
Yeah, okay, cool. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Dogs for sure? Okay, perfect. Yeah, definitely. I'm also a dog person. Bowie or Jagger?
Jagger.
Jagger, okay. Permanent or contingent?
Oh, that's a tough one. I have to go with contingent.
Contingent, also a good one. Volume or value?
Value.
Value for sure. Okay. Corporate brand or employer brand?
Employer brand.
Touch or tech?
Touch.
Awesome. And read or watch?
Read.
What's the latest you read?
Sorry, you just broke up there, Jan.
Sorry, I said, what's the latest that you that you read or listened in terms of podcasts or books?
I just read Culture Code, which I thought had some great insights into kind of how a culture helps you breed competitive advantage. That old saying of culture eats strategy for breakfast. I highly recommend it.
Cool. Thank you so much again, Mike. And for the audience, stick around. We'll be back with another very interesting leadership conversation and a great program throughout the entire day. Don't forget to visit the networking area and also stop by our partners to say hi. And for you, Mike, I really appreciate you having, being here and taking the time to, share all those insights with us. And I'm looking forward to staying in touch with you. Thank you so much and see you soon.
My pleasure.